إني أشم عندك رائحة طيبة كأنها رائحة جدي رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله. فقلت نعم إن جدك وأخاك تحت الكساء. فدنا الحسين نحو الكساء فقال السلام عليك يا جداه، السلام عليك يا من اختاره الله، أتأذن لي أن أدخل معكما تحت الكساء؟ فقال ما عليك السلام يا ولدي ويا شافع أمتي، قد أذنت لك. فدخل معهما تحت الكساء. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. فأقبل عند ذلك أبو الحسن علي بن أبي طالب عليهما السلام، فقال السلام عليك يا بنت رسول الله. فقلت وعليك السلام يا أبا الحسن ويا أمير المؤمنين. فقال يا فاطمة إني أشم عندك رائحة طيبة كأنها رائحة أخي وابن عمي رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله. فقلت نعم ها هو مع ولديك تحت الكساء. وقال السلام عليك يا رسول الله، أتأذن لي أن أكون معكم تحت الكساء؟ فأقبل علي نحو الكساء وقال السلام عليك يا رسول الله، أتأذن لي أن أكون معكم تحت الكساء؟ قال له عليك السلام يا أخي ويا وصي وخليفتي وصاحب اللواء، قد أذنت لك. فدخل علي تحت الكساء. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. ثم أتيت نحو الكساء فقلت السلام عليك يا أبتاه يا رسول الله، أتأذن لي أن أكون معكم تحت الكساء؟ قال وعليك السلام يا بنتي ويا بدعتي، قد أذنت لك. فدخلت تحت الكساء. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. فلما اكتملنا جميعا تحت الكساء أخذ بي رسول الله بطرفي الكساء وأومأ بيده اليمنى إلى السماء وقال اللهم إن هؤلاء أهل بيتي وخاصتي وحامتي، لحمهم لحمي ودمهم دمي، يؤلمني ما يؤلمهم ويحزنني ما يحزنهم. أنا حربا لمن حاربهم وسلما لمن سالمهم، وعدوا لمن عاداهم ومحب لمن أحبهم. إنهم مني وأنا منهم، فاجعل صلواتك وبركاتك ورحمتك وغفرانك ورضوانك علي وعليهم، وأذهب عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. فقال الله عز وجل يا ملائكتي ويا سكان سماواتي، إني ما خلقت سماء مبنية ولا أرضا مدحية ولا قمرا منيرا ولا شمسا مضيئة ولا فلكا يدور ولا بحرا يجري ولا فلكا يسري إلا في محبة هؤلاء الخمسة الذين هم تحت الكساء. فقال الأمين جبرائيل يا رب ومن تحت الكساء؟ فقال عز وجل هم أهل بيت النبوة ومعدن الرسالة، هم فاطمة وأبوها وبالها وبنوها. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. فقال جبرائيل يا رب أتأذن لي أن أهبط إلى الأرض لأكون معهم سادسا؟ فقال الله نعم قد أذنت لك. فهبط الأمين جبرائيل وقال السلام عليك يا رسول الله. العلي الأعلى يقرأك السلام ويخصك بالتحية والإكرام ويقول لك معزتي وجلالي إني ما خلقت سماء مبنية ولا أرضا مدحية ولا قمرا منيرا ولا شمسا مضيئة ولا فلكا يدور ولا بحرا يجري ولا فلكا يسري إلا لأجلكم ومحبتكم، وقد أذن لي أن أدخل معكم، فهل تأذن لي يا رسول الله؟ فقال رسول الله وعليك السلام يا أمين وهي الله إنه نعم قد أذنت لك. فدخل جبرائيل معنا تحت الكساء. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. فقال لأبي إن الله قد أوحى إليكم يقول إنما يريد الله ليذهب عنكم الرجس أهل البيت وطهركم تطهيرا. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. فقال علي لأبي يا رسول الله أخبرني ما لجلوسنا هذا تحت الكساء من الفضل عند الله. فقال النبي صلى الله عليه وآله والذي بعثني بالحق نبيا واصطفاني بالرسالة نجيا ما ذكر خبرنا هذا في محفل من محافل أهل الأرض وفيه جمع من شيتنا ومحبينا إلا ونزلت عليهم الرحمة وحفت بهم الملائكة واستغفرت لهم إلى أن يتفرقوا. فقال علي عليه السلام إذا والله فزنا وفاز شيتنا ورب الكعبة. فقال أبي رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله يا علي والذي بعثني بالحق نبيا واصطفاني بالرسالة نجيا ما ذكر خبرنا هذا في محفل من محافل أهل الأرض ففيه جمع من شيتنا محبين فيهم مهموم إلا فرج الله همه ولا مغموم إلا وكشف الله غمه ولا طالب حاجة إلا وقضى الله حاجته وقال علي عليه السلام إذا والله فزنا وسعدنا وكذلك شيعتنا فازوا وصعدوا في الدنيا والآخرة ورب الكعبة. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعجل فرجهم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إني أسألك بحق محمد وأنت المحمود وقاليا وأنت الأعلى وحق فاطمة وأنت فاطر السماوات والأرض وحق الحسن وأنت المحسن وحق الحسين وأنت قديم الإحسان وحق الأئمة التسعة الطاهرين من ذرية الحسين عليهم السلام. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
صلوات. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والشمس وضحاها والقمر إذا تلاها والنهار إذا جلاها والليل إذا يغشاها والسماء وما بناها والأرض وما طحاها ونفس وما سواها فألهمها فجورها وتقواها قد أفلح من زكاها وقد خاب من دساها كذبت ثمود بتغواها إذ انبعث أشقاها فقال لهم رسول الله ناقة الله وسقياها فكذبوه فأقروها فدمدم عليهم ربهم بذنبهم فسواها ولا يخاف عقباها. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والضحى والليل إذا سجى ما ودعك ربك وما قال وللآخرة خير لك من الأولى ولسوف يعطيك ربك فترضى. ألم يجدك يتيما فآوى ووجدك ضالا فهدى، ووجدك عائلا ربنا فأما اليتيم فلا تقهر وأما السائل فلا تنهر وأما بنعمة ربك فحدث صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات. صلوات. جس نے شبیر سے وفا کی ہے، جس نے شبیر سے وفا کی ہے، اس کی مرضی بیاب خدا کی ہے، اس کی مرضی بیاب خدا کی ہے، اتنی قیمت نہیں پورا اتنی قیمت نہیں پورا تیری، جتنے عباس نے ادا کی ہے، جس نے شبیر سے وفا کی ہے. صلوات.
صلی علی محمد و آل محمد و آل محمد. بابا سے بلند نعرہ صلوات. سوچ پڑے مولانا آگے.
میدان میں والا نہ رہا اور کوئی گلا کٹانے والا نہ رہا جو مارا گیا اس کو اٹھا لائے حسین جو مارا گیا اس کو اٹھا لائے حسین شبیر کا کوئی لانے والا نہ رہا میدان میں
نعرہ صلوات محمد وآل آدھا کے تصرف میں تو آیا پانی آدھا کے تصرف میں تو آیا پانی پیاسوں کو کسی نے نہ پلایا پانی پیاسوں کو کسی نے نہ پلایا پانی حیوان تلک نہر سے سیراب ہوئے ہائے حیوان تلک نہر سے سیراب ہوئے پر شاہ کے بچوں نے نہ پایا پانی آدھا کے تصرف میں نعرہ صلوات بلندتر نعرہ صلوات اللہم صلی علی محمد وعلی محمد یہ کس نے کہا ماتم شبیر نہ ہوگا یہ کس نے کہا ماتم شبیر نہ ہوگا ہے خواب جو شرمندہ تعبیر نہ ہوگا یہ کس نے کہا ماتم اور جو بیعت فاسق کے لیے سر کو جھکا دے جو بیعت فاسق کے لیے سر کو جھکا دے وہ لاکھ کہے پیروے شبیر نہ ہوگا یہ کس نے کہا ماتم اور دنیا میں اگر بچ بھی گئے دشمن شبیر کیا قہر الہی بھی ناگیر نہ ہوگا اور وہ خود نہ رہے نام ہے اللہ کا باقی جو کہتے تھے اب نعرہ تکبیر نہ ہوگا یہ کس نے کہا ماتم شبیر نہ ہوگا یہ کس نے کہا ماتم شبیر نہ ہوگا اور جس جس نے دکھایا ہے دل فاطمہ زہرا ارے جس جس نے دکھایا ہے دل فاطمہ زہرا کیا حشر میں وہ لائق تعزیر نہ ہوگا یہ کس نے کہا ماتم اور جاتے ہیں تو شبیر کے ہمراہ ہیں اصغر لوٹیں گے تو آغوش میں بے شیر نہ ہوگا اور جس طرح پھرائے گئے در در حرم شاہ ارے جس طرح پھرائے گئے در در حرم شاہ رسوا یوں کوئی صاحب توقیر نہ ہوگا اور بیمار کو غش آ گیا زندان بلا میں کچھ دیر کو اب نہ ہے زنجیر نہ ہوگا یہ کس نے کہا ماتم
اعوذ باللہ من الشیطان الرجیم بسم اللہ الرحمن الرحیم. ساری تعریف اللہ کے لیے، درود و سلام محمد و آل محمد کے لیے. Mu'mineen, Mu'minat, as you all know, Muharram Majalises have started with Chandrat and will continue to 9th Rabiul Awwal. This weekend we are blessed to have our honorable and knowledgeable guest, once again, Moulana Bilal Rizvi from Dallas, Texas, lead us with his majlises. And we thank you for coming on our request, and may Mawla give you endless barakat and a long life to continue serving the Ahlul Bayt. The majalises will be carried out 3 nights, which will be tonight, tomorrow, which will be our Shab-e Gham, as well as Monday, which will be Shab-e Shahadat of Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam. And after the majlis on Monday, we will have the ziyarat of Taboot as well. As well as Sunday, there will be no program at ABBAS, but there will be the Jalus in downtown at 1:40 p.m. inshallah. And before calling Moulana Bilal Rizvi, I would like to say a couple of shares of Maula Abbas. بھیجا نہیں تھا شیر کو جنگ کے خیال سے، بھیجا نہیں تھا شیر کو جنگ کے خیال سے، لگ جاتی ورنہ آگ نہر میں، لگ جاتی ورنہ آگ نہر میں جلال سے، لگ جاتی ورنہ آگ نہر میں جلال سے، کٹ کٹ کے گرے ظلم کے پرچم زمین پر، کٹ کٹ کے گرے ظلم کے پرچم زمین پر، تیرا علم جوان ہے 1400 سال سے، نعرہ حیدری. And with these shares, I would like to call our respected Moulana Bilal Rizvi. Par Muhammad wa ale Muhammad salawat.
رحم الله من قرأ سورة الفاتحة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله، والصلاة والسلام على إمام القبلتين ونبي الحرمين وأفضل الثقلين وجد الحسن والحسين الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين الصادقين والذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. اللهم صل وسلم وزد وبارك على صاحب الدعوة النبوية والصولة الحيدرية والإسمة الفاطمية والحلم الحسنية والشجاعة الحسينية والعبادة السجادية والمآثر الباقرية والآثار الجعفرية والعلوم الكادمية والحجج الردوية والجود الثقفية والنقابة النقبية والحيبة العسكرية والغيبة الإلهية. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم عجل فرجه وسهل مخرجه. أما بعد، فقد قال الله في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم: والشعراء يتبعهم الغاوون ألم تر أنهم في كل واد يهيمون وأنهم يقولون ما لا يفعلون إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات فذكروا الله كثيرا وانتصروا من بعد ما ظلموا وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. صدق الله العلي العظيم. For the love of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. For the love of Fatima al-Zahra in particular, a second salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. For the hastening of the reappearance of the master of our time, a louder salawat ala Muhammad. Before beginning the majlis, first and foremost, I thank Allah that He's given me tawfiq to sit on this mimbar at DAR-E ABBAS once again. Because when Allah gives tawfiq and opportunity, it is upon His servants to engage in the act of shukr and to thank Allah. And when Allah takes away tawfiq and opportunity, then it's upon His servants to engage in istighfar and turning back towards Allah. With that said, for this community and for the members of this community, sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. When one examines the literature and the statements from the day of Ashura, they'll find that a key position upon the day of Ashura was played by the battlefield poetry, otherwise known as the rajas within the Arabic language. You see, the Arabs of that time, when they would go and fight, it was their style that initially they would engage either in one-on-one combat called mubaraza or biraz, or two-on-two combat, or three-on-three combat. And when they would go out into the battlefield, amongst the things which they would carry out is the recitation of the rajas. Within the rajas, you find that individual who would recite this battlefield poetry. Number one, he would describe himself. Number two, he would describe his tribe and his family. From the third level, he would describe his virtues and his fadila. And from the fourth level, he would show that why is the enemy making a mistake for attacking him. You see, when you look in Islamic history, you find that there are a number of arajis, which is the plural of rajas, even mentioned before the day of Ashura. And without a doubt, one of the most famous of the rajas poetry is the rajas of Amir al-Mu'mineen upon the day of Khaybar. When Rasulullah said, لا أعطين الراية غدا رجلا كرارا وغير فرار, that tomorrow I will give the alam to an individual. Number one, he is a rajul and a man. Number two, he is brave, he is karrar. Number three, he doesn't run away. يحب الله ورسوله ويحبه الله ورسوله. He loves Allah and His Prophet, and Allah and His Prophet love this individual. You see, I said in a previous majlis that the goal of Islamic spirituality is for one to attain the love of Allah and for one to become the mahbub and the beloved of Allah. And if there is anywhere in history that on the tongue of Risalat it has been certified that an individual had that love for Allah and Allah had that love for that individual, then it's none other than Amir al-Mu'mineen upon the day of Khaybar. So you find when Amir al-Mu'mineen, he goes upon the day of Khaybar, he faces marhab and he recites the line, Ana alladhi sammatni ummi Haydara, that I am the one whose mother had named me Haydar. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. So you find in this manner, the presence of the rajas or the battlefield poetry has continued from the advent of Islam, and in reality, its origin is even pre-Islamic. You see, in pre-Islamic Arabian society, there were a number of characteristics which Islam found problematic. For example, there was no overarching system of adala and justice. These individuals, they would bury their daughters alive. These individuals would engage in acts which are not befitting of a human being. But at the same time, we have to admit and acknowledge that there were certain characteristics of the pre-Islamic Arabs which were viewed positively by Islam. For example, the pre-Islamic Arabs, they would respect bravery. These were individuals who would honor their guests. These are individuals who would view generosity as something which is positive. That's why when Islam came to reform the culture of pre-Islamic Arabia, there were really three categories where Islam placed the culture of pre-Islamic Arabia. The first category was that category in which there was no compromising. These concepts were completely in contradiction with the Islamic principles. For example, the worship of idols, Islam didn't come to compromise upon that. The Quran says, قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ لَا أَعْبُدُ مَا تَعْبُدُونَ. That, O Rasulullah, say to the kuffar. And even within the Quran, there is a raz and a secret over here. Because when you look at the Quran, Allah does not address the kuffar directly. Allah says, O Rasulullah, you are Bashir and you are Nadir. That you are the bringer of good news, you are the warner, you address the kuffar. And Rasulullah says that I will not worship what you worship. And at the end of the verse it says, Lakum dinakum waliyuddin, to you your religion, to me my religion. You know, the asbab al-nuzul of this ayat is that some of the kuffar and the disbelievers of Quraysh, they came to Rasulullah and they said, Ya Rasulullah, for a number of months we will worship your Allah. And for the same number of months you will worship our idols. At that moment, the verse is revealed that when it comes to Tawheed, there is no compromising in this picture of Tawheed. That's why on the day of the conquest of Makkah, all of the companions, they would say, Al-Yawm Yawm al-Malhama. They would say that today is the day of revenge. But upon that day of the conquest of Makkah, Rasulullah says, no, Al-Yawm Yawm al-Marhama. That today is the day to forgive these individuals. that there were many things which Rasulullah forgave, but he didn't forgive the worshipping of idols. That he personally would go to the Kaaba, he would destroy the idols within the Kaaba, and the largest of the idols he would leave to Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib. You know when Amir al-Mu'mineen, you see, the greatest of the idols of Quraysh, Allat, they would keep him on top of the Kaaba. Amir al-Mu'mineen says, Ya Rasulullah, I will lift you and you will break that idol. Rasulullah says, if all of the Qabail and the tribes of the Arabs tried to lift me, they wouldn't be able to lift me. At that moment, Rasulullah lifts Amir al-Mu'mineen, and Amir al-Mu'mineen breaks that idol from the top of the Kaaba. But you know, as Amir al-Mu'mineen is coming down, it's stated that the Imam falls from the hands of Rasulullah, and as he hits the ground, he is smiling. They say, Ya Ali, why are you smiling at this moment? Amir al-Mu'mineen says that how is it that I can't smile when it is Rasulullah who lifted me up and it is Jibreel who placed me on the ground? So you find in that reality, the first level of the pre-Islamic acts were those which there was no compromise. From the second level, we found that there were certain things which were held sacred in pre-Islamic Arabia, which Islam accepted, but it required reform. For example, the Kaaba was something which the Arabs of Quraysh, they held sacred. The Hajj is an act which they would perform, but they didn't perform it according to the principles of the deen of Nabi Ibrahim. So Islam came and reformed that. But from the third level, there were certain acts within the culture of pre-Islamic Arabia that Islam didn't comment upon. For example, in the Sharia, it is stated that a person gets married, that they have the nikah recited, but it is not wajib to wear a particular color, red, green, yellow, when the nikah is recited. That is something which is left to the culture of that time period, as long as it is within the bounds of the Sharia. So as long as one's culture does not impede the Sharia and the principles of Islam, you find that there is no issue with culture within the religion. And when you look at every single culture across time, you find that within every culture is the presence of poetry. You see, there are two types of speech that a person engages in. Number one is kalamun manthur. Kalamun manthur or nathar is straightforward speech which engages in our dialogues, in our discussions, in our conversations, in our normal mukalama. You find that is nathar. But at the second type, you find that there is the presence of nadam. Nadam has certain features that makes it a sha'r and a poem in Arabic. You see, the word sha'r in Arabic comes from the word shu'ur. The word shu'ur means to be able to understand adrikul daqa'iq, as they say in Arabic. That thing which is daqiq. That thing which other individuals find it hard to comprehend, the poet is able to explain in one or two lines. You know, oftentimes we'll give a majlis and a lecture for an hour, hour and a half. But sometimes a poet will come and in 2 lines he'll summarize the entire majlis. You know, there's a line of poetry in Arabic that describes the falling of Imam al-Hussein to the ground, and it describes the raising of the head of Imam al-Hussein. That poet says that, O Hussein, when you fell to the ground, you fell as Musa did in front of Tur as-Sinin, in front of Mount Sinai, when Allah says in the Quran, فَخَرَّ مُوسَى صَائِقًا. But when your head was lifted, it was lifted in the way that Isa was lifted towards the heaven. In other words, Sayyid al-Shuhada wouldn't fall towards the ground unless this was the amr and the command of Allah. And in other words, the head of Hussein and the way Isa was lifted and is that individual who continues to give guidance. Even when that head of Imam al-Hussein is on a spear, the head of the Imam would recite Quran. So you find in that manner, the poet is able to summarize that it comes from the word shu'ur. But even in poetry, there are certain qualities that you find within a sha'r. Number one, a sha'r has a wazan towards it. There is a meter, there is a bahar. Bahar-e-Tawil, for example, or Bahar-ul-Rajaz, upon which the Rajaz poetry is there. And then you'll find the presence of the kafiyah or the rhyming at the end. You know, for example, the famous line that Al-Farazdak gives in the praise of Imam Zainul Abidin, you find that Qasida of Farazdak, every line ends in the letter Mim. هذا الذي تعرف البطحاء وطأته والبيت يعرفه والهل والحرم هذا النقي التقي الطاهر العلم هذا ابن فاطمة إن كنت جاهله. So what does the poet say? He says that this is the one that the land of Makkah recognizes his footsteps. And the haram knows him. Outside the haram knows him. This is the one who is naqi and pure. He is taqi and pious. He is tahir and pure. He is alam and distinguished. This is the son of Fatimatul Zahra, if you don't know who this is. So you find in that manner, poetry has a reality. But over here, you find something very interesting. When you come to the Quran in Surah Al-Shu'ara, it speaks of the poets, but it speaks in a way condemning the poets. For example, within these ayat, Allah says, وَالشُّعَرَاءُ يَتَّبِعُهُمُ الْغَاوُونَ. That only the misguided, only the astray, they follow the poets. Alam tara annahum fi kulli wadin yahimun. Do you not see that these poets, they go into every valley. They don't have a set direction. Every single place they go into. Alam tara an yaqulu ma la yaf'alun. Alam tara annahum yaquluna ma la yaf'alun. Do you not see that they say that which they don't act upon? So you find over here within this verse, there are three qualities of the poets which Allah, He doesn't like those qualities. The first quality is that the type of poetry that they write, only the misguided and those who are astray, they follow that type of poetry. The second quality of the poets which Allah doesn't like within the Quran is that they say that which they don't act upon. The third quality of the poets is that they go into every valley, meaning that their poetry has no maqsad, there is no purpose, there is no gharaz within that poetry. In other words, the issue of Islam was not with sha'r and shairi. The issue of Islam was with a specific type of poetry. And in that time period, you find those individuals, the themes of their poetry would be the desires of this world, women, their horses, their battle, revenge, blood. The Quran says only the misguided, they follow this poetry. But then there is a type of poetry which Allah, He praises. He says those who write that poetry, those who are praised in verse 227 of this chapter, إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. The first quality that a shair and a poet must have is that he must be sahibul iman, that he must have belief within him. The second quality of a poet is that he must have amal salih and act righteously. فَذَكَرُوا اللَّهَ كَثِيرًا. The third quality of a poet which is praised is that he remembers Allah. Then the fourth quality of a poet is وَانْتَصَرُوا مِنْ بَعْدِ مَا ظُلِمُوا. These poets, they assist one another when it comes to the defense and the himayat of those who are mazloom and oppressed. In other words, one of the greatest forms of poetry within the Quran is that poetry which explains the musibah and the sorrows of the mazloom and those who are oppressed. That's why that poetry for Sayyid al-Shuhada holds a fundamental position according to the mirror of the Quran. You see, this principle of Marthiya Khani is not something which is an antithesis to the Quran, but rather it is in line with the Quran. You know, poet after poet would come to Ahlul Bayt. You know, there was a poet by the name of As-Sayyid al-Himyari. As-Sayyid al-Himyari wasn't a Sayyid in the sense that he is the son of Fatima al-Zahra from the Nasl of Janab Zahra. But the reason he was called As-Sayyid al-Himyari is because Imam Sadiq says that you are Sayyid al-Shu'ara, that you are the best of poets. You know, whenever any shair would come to the Imam, he would recite Marthiya. The Imam would say, Anshidni bayanan, recite more. Abu Harun al-Makhfuf comes to the Imam. He recites. The Imam says, no, Abu Harun, Anshidni kama tunshidun ya'ni birrikka. Abu Harun, there's a style in which you recite this Marthiya. When you recite this Marthiya, recite it with a rikka, recite it with sorrow. But another version of this hadith, there are two versions of this hadith found within the sources. The second version says, Anshidni kama tartihi inda qabr al-Husayn. That if you're a Noha Khan, if you're a Marsiya Khan, if you're a Shair, the Imam gives a simple principle. That when you recite your Noha, your Marsiya, your Shairi, recite it as if you're standing by the grave of Imam al-Hussein. So you find Imam al-Sadiq would say, Anshidni bayanan, recite in this manner, recite more. But when As-Sayyid al-Himyari came to the Imam said, Sayyid al-Himyari, stop the Masayib. Now I can't handle any more, O Sayyid al-Himyari. You know, I'm not coming towards Masayib now, but the topic is to understand this poetry and what poetry is within Islam. You find Sayyid al-Himyari, he recites a line, he recites a qasida. He says, Umrur ala jadat al-Husayn faqul li a'dumihi az-zakiyya. That go past the grave of Imam al-Husayn and say to the body of Sayyid al-Shuhada, A'aduman ma zilti waqfa sakibatin raviya. That, O grave of Hussein, when others come, they put water upon the grave. But we're not here to put water on your grave, but rather it is our tears which will fall upon your grave, Ya Aba Abdullah. And then he continues reciting the qasida until he says the line that when you go past the grave of Imam al-Hussein, وَابْكِي كَمُعْوِلَةٍ أَتَتْ يَوْمًا لِوَاحِدِهَا الْمَنِيَّةِ. That when you go to the grave of Imam al-Hussein, cry like that mother who had one child. And it is the day that her one child has passed away. Imam al-Sadiq would say, Sayyid al-Himyari, stop the Masayib. So you find this is one example. Another example is the example of Qumayt ibn Zayd al-Asadi. You know, Qumayt is that individual that Imam Zainul Abidin would say, Allahumma gfir lil Qumayt ma qaddama wa ma akhara. That, oh Allah, forgive the past and the future sins of Qumayt. وَمَا أَسَرَّ وَمَا أَعْلَنَا. That what he did in secret and openly, forgive that for Qumayt ibn Zayd al-Asadi. You know, the khususiyat of Qumayt is that Qumayt was the first poet in the history of Islam who would use mantiq, logic, and burhan and proof and rationality to prove the position of Ahlul Bayt. He has a very famous collection of qasaid known as the Hashimiyat. You see, when you come to these poets, the greatest thing that you take from these poets is that you learn how to recite the fadila of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, whether it is Qumayt ibn Zayd al-Asadi or whether it is Mir Anis. You see, many people, they talk about Mir Anis, that historically was the Marsiya accurate, all of these discussions. From Mir Anis, he doesn't claim to be a historian. He doesn't claim to be a faqih and a jurist. He doesn't claim to be a muhaddith. But Mir Anis was an individual of ma'rifah and understanding. Mir Anis was an individual that when you read the Marsi of Anis, you learn how to recite the Fadail of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. So you find this is that work which a poet he does. And you find in Islamic history, one of the most famous mentions of that poetry which has been praised in the Quran is the mention of the rajas or the battlefield poetry. You see, I'll examine 10 of the arajis, the 10 of the lines of the rajas from the day of Ashura. You see, the first of the rajas that we find in the Maqtal, which took place on the day of Ashura, was the rajas of an individual by the name of Bashir ibn Amr al-Hadrami. Bashir ibn Amr al-Hadrami was one of the shuhada with Imam al-Hussein. And it's stated that when Bashir, he was in Karbala, news had reached Bashir that his son was taken captive in the outskirts of the city. Imam al-Hussein says to Bashir ibn Amr that Anta fi hillin min bayati, that Bashir, you are free to go. Your son is in danger. Sayyid al-Shuhada is not muhtaj and dependent upon anyone. Imam al-Hussein, if he invites someone, this is the one who is Sayyid al-Shabab Ahl al-Jannah. That he is the one who is opening the pathway towards heaven for these individuals. The Imam says, Bashir, anta fi hillin min bayati. Bashir says that if the animals of the desert were around me, then may they eat my body if I leave you, O Hussein. In other words, what is my son? What is the son of Fatima Zahra? So you find this is that reality. And Bashir, when he was on the day of Ashura, the rajas that Bashir he recites, he says, Al-yawm ya nafsu ulqi ar-Rahman. واليوم تجزينا بكل أحسان لا تجزعي فكل شيء فان والصبر أختلق in the Dayan. Bashir, when he recites this rajas, he says, upon this day, O soul, ya nafsu ulki ar-Rahman, that this is that day of meeting Allah. And he says, upon this day you will be rewarded for every goodness. That, O soul, do not have fear, do not have khawf, فَكُلُّ شَيْءٍ فَانٍ, for everything will be destroyed. And sabr at this moment is more appropriate to be rewarded upon the day of judgment. You see, from this rajas of Bashir ibn Amr al-Hadrami, the first quality of the ashab of Sayyid al-Shuhada that we see is that these are those individuals who had a comfortable relationship with death. You know, death is that reality. They didn't see it as a separation, but rather they saw death as a union with their beloved. You know, there's a hadith which says that when Malak al-Maut comes to Ibrahim, Ibrahim says to Malik al-Maut that go and tell Allah that when have you seen a friend try to take the life of their friend? Ibrahim was Khalilullah. Malik al-Maut goes towards Allah. Allah says, O Malik al-Maut, tell Ibrahim that where have you seen a friend delay to meet their friend? So you find the ashab of Sayyid al-Shuhada, you find Imam al-Hussein would remind them of that. When Ali Akbar comes back to the battlefield after fighting, Imam al-Hussein says, O Akbar, go towards the Maqtal. Your grandfather Rasulullah will give you from the pool of Kawthar, ya Ali Akbar. Your grandfather Ali bin Abi Talib is waiting for you, O Ali Akbar. And you find this is that perspective which Ahlul Bayt they presented. And then in the Rajas, in the third line, he said, فَكُلُّ شَيْءٍ فَانٍ, that everything will be destroyed. If everything will be fani, if everything will be destroyed, then why doesn't one just annihilate themselves in the love of Hussein ibn Ali? You see, on the day of Ashura, each of the ashab of Imam al-Hussein knew that in their final moments, a Muslim says, La ilaha illallah Muhammadan Rasulullah. You know, there's many hadith that say the one whose final words are La ilaha illallah Muhammadan Rasulullah, the kalima, their sins are forgiven. But when you look in the Maqtal, nobody is saying that in their final moment. If you find anything in the Maqtal, all they say is Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah. In other words, they recognize look at the Maqatil. The final moment, Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah, alayka minni salam. In other words, these individuals recognize that our Tawheed is Hussein. To send salam upon Hussein is to follow the command of Allah. And you find this is that reality. You know, there were many qualities of the ashab of Sayyid al-Shuhada. For example, it's written that Imam al-Hussein would say to Habib, Yarhamukallah, laqad kunta takhtimul Quran fi laylatin wahida, that, oh Habib, you would finish the Quran in one night. Those who would recite salat on the side of Imam al-Hussein. Those who would recite Quran on the side of Imam al-Hussein. Those who were Zahid on the side of Imam al-Hussein. But the greatest quality of these ashab we find in their ziyarat when we say Assalamu alaykum wa alal arwahi allati hallat bifinaik. That, O ashab of Hussein, salam be upon you, for you are those individuals who were fani and annihilated yourself at the door of Hussein. That the greatest quality of the ashab of Sayyid al-Shuhada is that they reach the maqam of fana with respect to the love of Ahlul Bayt. You see, when it comes to love of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad, there's darajat. Love is not all the same. You know, muhabbat is just the lowest level of love. Higher than muhabbat is mawaddat. Mawaddat, you express that love. Mawaddat, you follow your beloved. But the highest level of ishq is fana in annihilation. And you find this is that maqam which these ashab they reached. So you find the first of the rajas from the day of Ashura was the rajas of Bashir ibn Amr al-Hadrami. The second rajas which we find on the day of Ashura is by a companion by the name of Junada ibn al-Harith. When you look in the Maqtal, there is no tafasil or detail about Junada ibn al-Harith, except for that he was shaheed with Imam al-Hussein, and except for his rajas from the day of Ashura. Junada says, Ana Junadun wa ana ibn al-Harithi. That I am Junada, the son of Harith. لست بخوار أو بناكت عن بيتي حتى يرثني وارثي. He says, I am an individual that neither do I fear, nor do I break my bay'ah or my vow until my warith stands over me. And then he says, al-yawm tarif as-sa'id makiti, upon this day my body will be underneath the dust of this ground. You see the quality that Junada ibn al-Harith mentions in his Raja's poetry is that the companions of Imam al-Hussein are those individuals who do not break their bay'ah or their vow towards Ahlul Bayt. That's why it's stated in the hadith that there was an ayat of the Quran that Imam al-Hussein would recite when each of his companions would go to the Maqtal. Imam al-Hussein would repeat this ayat. Muslim bin Osaja goes, the Imam recites this ayat. Habib goes, the Imam recites this ayat. Aun and Muhammad go, the Imam recites this ayat. And that is the verse that says, مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ رِجَالٌ مَا صَدَقُوا مَا أَحَدُ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِمْ. That from amongst the believers, there are those individuals who held true to that promise and that covenant which Allah took from them. فَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ قَضَى نَحْبَهُ. There are those who fulfilled their vow, meaning that they're already martyred. وَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ يَنْتَظِرُ. There are others who are waiting. وَمَا بَدَّلُوا تَبْدِيلًا. And when they're waiting, they don't change their condition. You see, this is that reality. In the time period of Rasulullah, there was an individual who said, Ya Rasulullah, make dua for me. Rasulullah says, oh man, if I make this dua for you, what will you do? He says that whatever I receive from your dua, it is my vow that I will give it in the way of Allah. Rasulullah says to that man, Ta'laba, that this dua is not something which is going to help you. It's better that it's not accepted. Sometimes when we ask in dua, we ask for things which will bring our downfall, thinking that is khair and goodness for us. Rasulullah says, Ta'laba, this isn't good for you. Ta'laba says, Ya Rasulullah, make the dua. Rasulullah makes the dua, he gives 2 dirham towards this individual. From those 2 dirham, he starts his business. His business begins to grow. You know, initially, he would pray behind Rasulullah every salat. When the business began to grow, then once a day. Then after that, on the day of Jummah. After that, months they go by, they haven't seen Ta'laba. Rasulullah says, tell Ta'laba, the verse has been revealed which has made zakat wajib. You find, go and get that zakat from Ta'laba. When the companions, Amir al-Mu'mineen goes to Ta'laba, Ta'laba says, tell Muhammad that I will not give this towards him. In other words, the effect of an individual breaking their vow and their bay'ah towards Rasulullah is that he went into such a downward spiral. He went from the folds of Islam to outside of the folds of Islam. But the companions of Sayyid al-Shuhada are those individuals who held on to every vow which was made towards Ahlul Bayt. So you find this was the Rajas of Junada ibn al-Harith. The third Rajas from the day of Ashura is the Rajas of Hur upon the day of Ashura. You find that Hur, he says, Ana Hurrun wa ana ibn riyahi. That I am Hur. My father's name was Riyah. He says, Adribu fi a'naqikum bis-sayfi. He says, Ana hurrun wa ma'wadayfi adribu fi a'naqikum bis-sayfi. That I am Hur who takes care of my guests, and I am the one who will strike upon your neck with my sword. Then after that he says, من خير من حل بلاد الخيف أضرب ولا أرى من حيفي. That I will attack, protecting the best one who lived in the land of Makkah. And when I attack, there is no hesitation within me. So you find from the Rajas of Hur, the quality of the ashab of Sayyid al-Shuhada that Hur he praises is that he says, Inni ana al-Hur wa ma'wa dayfi, that I am Hur, the one who takes care of my guests. You see, the quality of Ahlul Bayt from the beginning to the end is that whenever anyone would come in need to their doorstep, you find that they would give towards those individuals. You know, there was a group of individuals, they come to Amir al-Mu'mineen. They say, Ya Ali, we are Mu'mineen, we are believers. The Imam says, why are you believers? Why are you Mu'mineen? They say that when Allah gives to us, we eat. And when Allah doesn't give to us, we do sabr and we have patience. The Imam says, in reality, you're like animals. They say, what do you mean? When an animal has food, an animal eats from it. And when an animal doesn't have food, what does he do? He has sabr and patience. Then they say, Ya Ali, how should a mu'min be? Amir al-Mu'mineen says, I am Amir al-Mu'mineen. When Allah gives to me, I give it in the way of Allah. And when Allah doesn't give to me, I do shukr and I thank Allah. You and I, when we have hardships, we do sabr. But Ahlul Bayt are those individuals in musibah and difficulties, they have shukr towards Allah. So you find this is that quality we find in the Rajas of Hur. After that, we find the Rajas of Zuhair ibn al-Qayn from the day of Ashura. You know, Zuhair is that individual that even in the final moments of Imam al-Hussein, the Imam would call Zuhair by his name. And Zuhair initially didn't leave from Makkah on the side of Imam al-Hussein. The hadith, the historical records, they say, Kana Uthmaniyan. That Zuhair was an individual who believed in the Khilafat of Uthman and that Uthman was wrongfully killed. In other words, Uthman was shaheed. But you find that Zuhair comes to the side of Imam al-Hussein. Imam al-Hussein in his final moments, he says, Ya Habib ibn Mazahir, wa ya Muslim ibn al-Awsaja, wa ya Zuhair ibn al-Qayn, ya Abdal al-Safa, wa ya Fursan al-Hijab, mali unadikum fala tajimun. That, oh Habib, Muslim Zuhair, why is it that I call you but you don't reply to me? You find this Zuhair on the day of Ashura. He says, Ana Zuhairun wa ana ibn Qayni. Aduduhum bisayfi an Husayni. In other words, I am Zuhair, I am the son of Qayn. I will defend using my sword Hussein. So you find this was the next of the Rajas. After that, before coming to the Rajas of Ahlul Bayt and concluding upon that, you find the next Rajas we find in the Maqtal, which is for the companions of Imam al-Hussein, is the Rajas of an individual by the name of Abu Umar al-Nahshali. Abu Umar al-Nahshali was an individual who was a servant from one of the tribes and he was shaheed on the day of Ashura. Abu Umar in his Rajas, when he was killed, he says, Abshir Hudit Rushta. Talka Ahmada. He says that, O soul, be glad that you have been guided and you will meet Rasulullah. Fi Jannat al-Firdausa ta'lu su'ada. And within Jannat al-Firdaus you'll be elevated. You see, the word used in this Rajas is the word Ahmad. You know, Ahmad in Arabic is ismut tafdeel. In other words, Hamid is somebody who praises Allah. But Ahmad is the one who has praised Allah the most. You know, wherever there is a Hamid, somebody who praises Allah, there is a Mahmud as well. Because for there to be a Hamid and somebody who is praising, somebody has to be praised and Mahmud. In the same way, where there is an Ahmad, somebody who praises the most, there is also a Muhammad, somebody who is praised the most. You know, upon this earth, the name of Rasulullah was Muhammad. But when you look at all of the hadith of Mi'raj, it doesn't say Ya Muhammad, it says Ya Ahmad. In other words, when Rasulullah was upon this earth, Rasulullah was Muhammad, Allah was Ahmad. And when Rasulullah goes on Mi'raj, Rasulullah is Ahmad, Allah is Muhammad. You find these qualities, they praise one another. So you find after this, the next rajas you find on the day of Ashura is the rajas of Ali Akbar. Where Ali Akbar alayhi salam says, Ana Ali ibn al-Husayn ibn Ali. نحن وبيت الله أولى بالنبي تالله لا يحكم فينا ابن الدئي أضرب بالسيف أحامي عن أبي ضرب غلام قرشي هاشمي علوي. You find that he says, I am Ali, the son of Hussein, the son of Ali. That by the house of Allah we are closest towards Rasulullah. And I swear by Allah, this illegitimate individual will not rule over us. Using my sword, I will protect my father. And I will attack him, the attack of the one who is Qarashi, number one, who is Hashimi, number two, who is Alawi, number three. You see, one quality that he mentions in this rajas is that I am from the lineage of Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib. You know, when you look within the Quran, in the entire Quran, the word Nur is used in the singular and the mufrad. The word Nur and light, it is always used in the singular, and the word dhulamat and darkness is always used in the jama and the plural. لِتُخْرِجَ النَّاسِ مِنَ النُّورِ إِلَى الظُّلُمَاتِ, for example, the verse it says. And what this goes to show is that the path of guidance has always been one, whereas the path of opposition is in multitude. In other words, when one looks at the universe, the proper conclusion is one, that Allah exists. He is wajib al-wujud. He is not dependent upon anyone. But the wrong answer can be multiple. Some said there is no Allah. Some said there are multiple gods. Some said there is an Allah, but He doesn't control the universe. In other words, the path of haqq is one, the path of falsehood changes itself. Hussainiyat has always been one, whereas Yazidiyat always changes its face. Hussainiyat has always been one, whereas Yazidiyat in reality changes its face. And the Quran alludes to this fact that those who have given guidance have always come from one source and there is harmony in between them. The verse of the Quran in Surah Al Imran, it says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ إِسْتَفَى آدَمَ وَنُوحًا وَآلَ إِبْرَاهِيمَ وَآلَ إِمْرَانَ عَلَى الْعَالَمِينَ ذُرِّيَّةً بَعْدُهَا مِنْ بَعْدٍ. That Allah has chosen Adam and Nuh and the family of Ibrahim and the family of Imran. You know, interestingly enough, this is the verse which Imam al-Hussein recited at the Shahadat of Ali Akbar. Ulama, they say, this recitation is a dalil that even though Ali Akbar was not a Nabi or an Imam, he was those who was Mustafa and chosen by God. That Imam al-Hussein read this ayat on the body of Ali Akbar. But what this verse shows is that those who give guidance after Rasulullah, there must be harmony between them. That Nur is one, guidance is one. If there is contradiction, then that group is not the Hadi and the guide for the Ummah. If you say it is the wives who are the guide for the Ummah, then upon the day of Jamal, Salma says to another wife that when the dogs of Hawra begin to bark, then at that moment know that you made a mistake. If you say the companions are that group, then I'll show you battles where companions are on one side and companions are on the other side. But if there ever was a group that harmony was there, that guidance was upon one path, then it is that group that which looking at the first of them is like looking at the last of them. And looking at the last of them is like looking at the first of them. And it is only one group about whom Rasulullah says, Awwaluna Muhammad wa akhiruna Muhammad wa awsatuna Muhammad wa kulluna Muhammad. In other words, from the top to the bottom, there is harmony within this group. So you find Ali Akbar, when he recites this rajas, he shows that there is a harmony between us and the path of Amir al-Mu'mineen. The seventh rajas from the day of Ashura, before coming to the final three arajis, is the rajas of Imam al-Hussein. You know, when Imam al-Hussein, he goes to the Maqtal, he says, Al-Maut awla min rukub al-ar, wal-ar awla min dukhul al-nar. أنا الحسين ابن علي أحمي عيالات أبي لا عيت أن لا أنثني عمدي على دين النبي. The Imam says that death is better than humiliation. That if it comes to being humiliated, to not standing up on the path of fadila and virtue, death is better than that humiliation. But when it comes to humiliation, it is better than entering Jahannam in the fire. In other words, from the worldly perspective, to have your family captured is something which brings hardship. But Hussein is saying that I will bear this hardship for the deen of Allah. He says, I am Hussein ibn Ali. I will protect my family. I will never give up, and I follow upon the footsteps of Allah's Nabi Rasulullah. So you find this was that rajas. And the final three rajas from the day of Ashura are the lines of Aba Fadl Abbas on the day of Ashura. You see, when you look at the rajas of Aba Fadl Abbas, it shows the ma'rifat of Aba Fadl Abbas. For example, the first of the rajas that we find of Aba Fadl Abbas, he says, La arhabul mawta idal mawtu raqa. حتى أواري في تلاسيت اللقا نفسي لنفس المصطفى الطهري وقا إني أنا العباس أغدو بالسخا لا أخاف شر يوم الملتقى. Aba Fadl Abbas says that when he was going towards the Furat, and you find the army was stopping Aba Fadl Abbas from reaching the Furat, Aba Fadl Abbas says that I do not fear death when death it approaches me. The only thing which will stop me is when I am covered by the swords which are attacking me. You are talking about my nafs. I have given my nafs to Mustafa, the pure one. Inni anal Abbasu aghdu bisaka. That I am Abbas who is bringing the water, and I do not fear the evil of the day of judgment. You know, the Quran, it says that every soul on the day of judgment will have fear. إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهَ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ. This rajas of Aba Fadl Abbas is a dalil to the fact that this is that individual who reached the maqam of qalb salim within the Quran. That maqam where the heart has been fortified. After that, you find that after Aba Fadl Abbas, he places the water in the mashk. He begins to come back. And as he's coming back, they cut the right arm of Aba Fadl Abbas. When they cut the right arm of Abbas, he recites his second rajas. He says, Wallah in qata'tum yamini. Inni ohami abadan andini. وعن إمام صادق اليقين نجل النبي الطاهر الأمين. He says that if you cut my arm, والله إن قطعتم يميني, if you cut my right arm, by Allah I will never stop defending his deen. And what is that deen? I will never stop defending that Imam who is Sadiqul Yaqini. That Imam who is truthful. That Imam who was Yaqeen. The one who was the grandson of Rasulullah. You know, they cut the right arm of Abbas. After that, when they cut the left arm of Abbas, Abbas, he recites his final rajas. He says, Ya nafsu la takhsha min al-kuffar. That, O soul, do not fear these kuffar. Abshiri bi rahmatil jabbar. The only thing you have coming is the rahmat of Allah. Then he says, Ma'an nabiy sayyid al-mukhtar. That you will be with Rasulullah. قَدْ قَطَعُوا بِبَغْيِهِمْ يَسَارِي. That these individuals, they've cut my left arm. فَأَسْلِهِمْ يَا رَبِّ حَرَّ النَّارِ. That, Ya Allah, stow them in towards the fire. You know, after the left arm of Aba Fadl Abbas was cut, it stated an arrow goes into the eye of Aba Fadl Abbas. In Karbala, one alim was reciting this masayib. He said to the reciter, the alim was listening, he said to the zakir, stop the masayib. That night, that alim, he sees Aba Fadl Abbas. Abbas says, why did you stop my reciter? The alim says, I didn't know if the masayib was true. I didn't know if an arrow went into your eye. Aba Fadl Abbas says the masayib was true. Whenever something goes in your eye, you use your arms. I didn't have arms in between my knees. I placed that arrow. Using my knees, I took that arrow out of my eye. You know, when Ahlul Bayt, they reach Kufa, Qasim, the son of Asbaq bin Nabata, he describes how Ahlul Bayt entered Kufa. He says all of the women were upon one rope. When everyone is on one rope, you find children and those who are elder, all of them. He says in front of us was the head of Hussein. But he says, as I was watching this caravan enter Kufa, I saw there was a head which was tied towards the horse. And that head would hit the ground as it's going. And whenever the horse would stop, that head would hit the horse. I would say that, whose head is that? They would say, that is the head of Aba Fadl Abbas. You know, when they were in Kufa, I don't have any more energy to recite. One last line of Masayib. When they were in Kufa, a lady comes to Sayyida Zainab. She sees Sakina, the daughter of Imam al-Hussein. She says, oh girl, can you make a dua for me? The daughter of Imam al-Hussein raises her hands. The lady says, oh girl, ya binta, in the way that you are yatim, pray that my children don't become yatim. In the way that you are captive, pray my children don't become captive. Then she says, make dua that I can go towards Medina. Sayyida Zainab says, who do you know in Medina? She says, I know the house of Ali, the house of Fatima. Sayyida Zainab says, oh Habiba, who do you know within that house? She says, I know Hussein, I know Zainab, I know Abbas. Majlis, Sayyida Zainab Sazoum Habiba, that is the head of us. I am Zainab. On the ground is the head of Abbas. على لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين. ماتم حسين.
اللہ جانے سین زینب نے کیویں قید نبھائی، اللہ جانے سین زینب نے کیویں قید نبھائی، اللہ جانے اللہ جانے سین زینب نے کیویں قید نبھائی، اللہ جانے سین زینب نے کیویں قید نبھائی، اللہ جانے اللہ جانے سین زینب نے کیویں قید نبھائی، 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 کیویں سفر کیتے باج براوا ہے درد ستائی، اللہ جانے سین زینب نے کیویں قید نبھائی، اللہ جانے سین زینب نے کیویں قید نبھائی، کیویں سفر کیتے باج براوا ہے درد ستائی، اللہ جانے سین زینب نے کیویں قید نبھائی، اللہ جانے سین زینب نے کیویں قید نبھائی، اللہ جانے سین زینب نے کیویں قید نبھائی، اپنے ہی گھر دے وچ جس دم آ کے عبداللہ نے پوچھیا کہ تو بی بی کونے، بس روندے ہویا خاک اٹھا کے زینب نے اڑائی، اللہ جانے سین زینب نے کیویں قید نبھائی، اللہ جانے سین زینب نے کیویں
جانے سر زینب نے بھی وقت نبھائی
اپنے ہی گھر دے وچ جس دم آ کے عبداللہ نے پوچھیا کہ تو بی بی کونے بس روندے ہویا خاک اٹھا کے زینب نے اڑائی اللہ جانے سین زینب نے کیویں قید نبھائی
اللہ جانے سر زینب نے بھی وقت نبھائی اللہ جانے سر زینب نے بھی وقت نبھائی
عابد نو پتھراں دے وچ کدی سفراں چ سکینہ نو کدی بہنا نو کدی ہاتھاں دے در سانبتی رہ گئی زہرا دی کمائی اللہ جانے سین زینب نے کیویں قید نبھائی
اللہ جانے سر زینب نے بھی وقت نبھائی
عابد نو پتھراں دے وچ کدی سفراں چ سکینہ نو کدی بہنا نو کدی ہاتھاں دے نل سانبتی رہ گئی زہرا دی کمائی اللہ جانے سین زینب نے کیویں قید نبھائی
اللہ جانے سر زینب نے بھی وقت نبھائی
کیویں سفر کیتے باج براواں ہے درد ستائی اللہ جانے سین زینب نے کیویں قید نبھائی
اللہ جانے سر زینب نے بھی وقت نبھائی
ظالم دے لباں تے آیا جدو ماں فاطمہ زہرا دا برے مجمع وچ ماں دی عظمت لئی خطبے پڑھ دی زہرا دی آئی اللہ جانے سین زینب نے کیویں قید نبھائی
اللہ جانے سر زینب نے بھی وقت نبھائی
ظالم دے لباں تے آیا جدو ماں فاطمہ زہرا دا برے مجمع وچ ماں دی عظمت لئی خطبے پڑھ دی زہرا دی آئی اللہ جانے سین زینب نے کیویں قید نبھائی
اللہ جانے سر زینب نے بھی وقت نبھائی
اپنے ہی گھر دے وچ جس دم آ کے عبداللہ نے پوچھیا کہ تو بی بی کونے بس روندے ہویا خاک اٹھا کے زینب نے اڑائی اللہ جانے سین زینب نے کیویں قید نبھائی
اللہ جانے سر زینب نے بھی وقت نبھائی اللہ جانے سر زینب نے بھی وقت نبھائی اللہ جانے سر زینب نے بھی وقت نبھائی
شبیر ڈھونڈتا ہے اکبر کہاں گرا ہے شبیر ڈھونڈتا ہے اکبر کہاں گرا ہے
شبیر ڈھونڈتا شبیر ڈھونڈتا ہے اکبر کہاں گرا ہے
شبیر ڈھونڈتا ہے اکبر کہاں گرا ہے شبیر ڈھونڈتا ہے اکبر کہاں گرا ہے بیٹے کے قاتلوں سے یہ باپ پوچھتا ہے اکبر کہاں گرا ہے شبیر ڈھونڈتا ہے اکبر کہاں گرا ہے بیٹے کے قاتلوں سے یہ باپ پوچھتا ہے اکبر کہاں گرا ہے شبیر ڈھونڈتا ہے شبیر ڈھونڈتا ہے اتنا ضعیف ہو گیا آتا نہیں نظر آتا نہیں نظر اکبر کی لاش سے یوں ہی کہتا گزر گیا ہے اکبر کہاں گرا ہے شبیر ڈھونڈتا ہے اکبر کہاں گرا ہے شبیر ڈھونڈتا ہے اکبر کہاں گرا ہے اتنا ضعیف ہو گیا آتا نہیں نظر آتا نہیں نظر اکبر کی لاش سے یوں ہی کہتا گزر گیا ہے اکبر کہاں گرا ہے اکبر کہاں گرا ہے خم آ گیا کمر میں آتا نہیں کرا آتا نہیں کرا بازو کے بل چلا ہونٹوں پہ یہ صدا ہے اکبر کہاں گرا ہے شبیر ڈھونڈتا ہے اکبر کہاں گرا ہے راہ ہے شبیر ڈھونڈتا خم آ گیا کمر میں جاتا نہیں چلا جاتا نہیں چلا بازو کے بل چلا ہونٹوں پہ یہ صدا ہے اکبر کہاں گرا ہے شبیر ڈھونڈتا ہے اکبر کہاں گرا ہے بیٹے کے قاتلوں سے یہ باپ پوچھتا ہے اکبر کہاں گرا ہے شبیر ڈھونڈتا ہے اکبر کہاں گرا ہے شبیر اٹھنے کی کوششوں میں جو منہ کے بل گرا جو منہ کے بل گرا ایک کانپتی آواز میں عابد نے جب سنا ہے اکبر کہاں گرا ہے شبیر ڈھونڈتا ہے اکبر کہاں گرا ہے اکبر کہاں گرا ہے شبیر ڈھونڈتا ہے کہاں اٹھنے کی کوششوں میں جو منہ کے بل گرا، جو منہ کے بل گرا، ایک کانپتی آواز میں عابد نے جب سنا ہے اکبر کہاں گرا ہے، شبیر ڈھونڈتا ہے اکبر کہاں گرا ہے۔ بیٹے کے قاتلوں پہ، بیٹے کے قاتلوں سے یہ باپ پوچھتا ہے اکبر کہاں گرا ہے، شبیر ڈھونڈتا ہے اکبر کہاں گرا ہے۔ اتنا ضعیف ہو گیا آتا نہیں نظر، آتا نہیں نظر، اکبر کی لاش سے یوں ہی کہتا گزر گیا ہے اکبر کہاں گرا ہے، شبیر ڈھونڈتا ہے اکبر کہاں گرا ہے۔ بیٹے کے قاتلوں سے یہ باپ پوچھتا ہے اکبر کہاں گرا ہے، شبیر ڈھونڈتا ہے اکبر کہاں گرا ہے۔ اٹھنے کی کوششوں میں جو منہ کے بل گرا، جو منہ کے بل گرا، ایک کانپتی آواز میں عابد نے جب سنا ہے اکبر کہاں گرا ہے، شبیر ڈھونڈتا ہے اکبر کہاں گرا ہے۔ اکبر کہاں گرا ہے، شبیر ڈھونڈتا ہے، غم آ گیا کمر میں آتا نہیں قرار، آتا نہیں قرار، بازو کے بل چلا ہونٹوں پہ یہ صدا ہے اکبر کہاں گرا ہے، شبیر ڈھونڈتا ہے اکبر کہاں گرا ہے۔ یا حسین 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 گزرا تھا بیبیوں کو لے کر کہاں کہاں سے، گزرا تھا بیبیوں کو لے کر کہاں کہاں سے، آئے کھلے سروں پر، آئے کھلے سروں پر،
پتھر کہاں کہاں سے پوچھو نہ سارباں سے گزرا تھا بیبیوں کو لے کر
کہاں کہاں سے گزرا تھا بیبیوں کو لے کر کہاں کہاں سے
گزرا تھا بیبیوں کو لے کر کہاں کہاں سے گزرا تھا بیبیوں کو
لے کر کہاں کہاں سے
گزرا تھا بیبیوں کو
لے کر کہاں کہاں سے
گزرا تھا بیبیوں کو
لے کر کہاں کہاں سے
آئے کھلے سروں پہ آئے کھلے سروں پہ پتھر کہاں کہاں سے پوچھو نہ سارباں سے گزرا تھا بیبیوں کو
لے کر کہاں کہاں سے گزرا تھا بیبیوں کو لے کر کہاں کہاں سے
گزرا تھا بیبیوں کو
لے کر کہاں کہاں سے
یہاں سیلیاں لگی تھی یہ راسیاں بندھی تھی یہ سیلیاں لگی تھی یہ راسیاں بندھی تھی زینب کے بازوؤں پہ آئے نشاں کہاں سے پوچھو نہ سارباں سے گزرا تھا بیبیوں کو لے کر کہاں کہاں سے گزرا تھا
بیبیوں کو لے کر کہاں کہاں سے
گزرا تھا بیبیوں کو لے
کر کہاں کہاں سے
یا سیلیاں لگی تھی یا راسیاں بندھی تھی یا سیلیاں لگی تھی یا راسیاں بندھی تھی زینب کے بازوؤں پر آئے نشاں کہاں سے پوچھو نہ سارباں سے گزرا تھا بیبیوں کو لے کر کہاں کہاں سے گزرا تھا
بیبیوں کو لے کر کہاں کہاں سے
گزرا تھا بیبیوں کو
لے کر کہاں کہاں
سے گزرا تھا
بیبیوں کو لے کر کہاں کہاں سے
باندھی گئی تھی بیڑی تو کہ گلو سے کیسے باندھی گئی تھی بیڑی تو کہ گلو سے کیسے آتی تھی سانس کیسے کھچتی تھی جا کہاں سے پوچھو نہ سارباں سے گزرا تھا بیبیوں کو لے کر کہاں کہاں سے گزرا تھا
بیبیوں کو لے کر کہاں کہاں سے
گزرا تھا بیبیوں کو
لے کر کہاں کہاں
سے گزرا تھا بیبیوں کو
لے کر کہاں کہاں سے
باندھی گئی تھی بیڑی تو کہ گلو سے کیسے باندھی گئی تھی بیڑی تو کہ گلو سے کیسے آتی تھی سانس کیسے کھچتی تھی جا کہاں سے پوچھو نہ سارباں سے گزرا تھا
بیبیوں کو
لے کر کہاں کہاں سے گزرا تھا
بیبیوں کو لے کر کر کہاں کہاں سے
گزرا تھا بیبیوں
کو لے کر کہاں کہاں
سے گزرا تھا بیبیوں کو
لے کر کہاں کہاں
سے گزرا تھا بیبیوں کو
لے کر کہاں کہاں سے
یہ کلمہ گو شرابی ہر ایک قدم پہ ہوں گے یہ کلمہ گو شرابی ہر ایک قدم پہ ہوں گے گزرے گی کیسے زینب بے پردہ وہاں سے پوچھو نہ سارے ماں سے گزرا تھا بیبیوں کو لے کر کہاں کہاں سے گزرا
تھا بیبیوں کو لے کر کہاں کہاں سے
گزرا تھا بیبیوں کو
لے کر کہاں کہاں
سے گزرا تھا بیبیوں کو
لے کر کہاں کہاں سے
گزرا تھا بیبیوں کو
لے کر کہاں کہاں سے
یہ کلمہ گو شرابی ہر ایک قدم پہ ہوں گے یہ کلمہ گو شرابی ہر ایک قدم پہ ہوں گے گزرے گی کیسے زینب بے پردہ وہاں سے پوچھو نہ سارے ماں سے گزرا تھا بیبیوں کو لے کر کہاں کہاں سے گزرا تھا بیبیوں
کو لے کر کہاں کہاں سے
گزرا تھا بیبیوں کو
لے کر کہاں کہاں سے
گزرا تھا بیبیوں
کو لے کر کہاں کہاں
سے گزرا تھا بیبیوں کو
لے کر کہاں کہاں سے
کھاتی رہی تماچے کانوں سے خون جاری کھاتی رہی تماچے کانوں سے خون جاری رخسار سے ملیں گے یہ نیل اب کہاں سے پوچھو نہ سارے ماں سے گزرا
بیبیوں کو
لے کر کہاں کہاں سے گزرا
تھا بیبیوں کو لے کر کہاں کہاں سے گزرا تھا بیبیوں کو لے کر کہاں کہاں سے گزرا تھا بیبیوں کو لے کر کہاں کہاں سے اور حارث ابن نوفل لانا اشمر لانا اشمر لانا
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد يا حامد بحق محمد يا عالي بحق علي يا فاطر بحق فاطمة يا محسن بحق الحسن يا أنت قديم ذو الإحسان بحق الحسين وبحق 9 المعصومين من ذرية الحسين عليهم السلام اللهم بأخص صفاتك بعز جلالك وبأعظم أسمائك بدمائك الشهدائك بمناجات فقرائك اللهم إني أسألك وزيادة في العلم وصحة في الجسم وطولا في العمر وتوبة قبل الموت وراحة عند الموت والمغفرة بعد الموت ودخولا في جنة ونجاة من النار وعافية الدنيا والآخرة رحم الله من يقرأ الفاتحة مع الصلوات
السلام علیکم یا ابا عبداللہ، السلام علیکم یا رسول اللہ صلی اللہ علیہ وآلہ وسلم، السلام علیکم یا فاطمہ الزہرا سیدۃ النساء العالمین، السلام علیکم یا خدیجۃ الکبریٰ ام المؤمنین، السلام علیکم یا علی مرتضی امیر المؤمنین، السلام علیکم یا حسن مجتبی سید الشباب اہل الجنہ، السلام علیکم یا حسین الشہید بکربلا ایہا الشہید وابن الشہید ایہا المظلوم وابن المظلوم، لعن اللہ امتا قتلتک ولعن اللہ امتا ظلمتک ولعن اللہ امتا سمیت بذالک فرضیت بہ، السلام علیکم مولا یا ابو الفضل عباس افضل شہداء کربلا خمر بنی ہاشم سکائے سکینہ یا عبد الصالح ابن امیر المومنین علیہ السلام ورحمۃ اللہ وبرکاتہ، السلام علیکم یا غریب الغرباء، السلام علیکم معین الضعفاء والفقراء، السلام علیکم یا شمس الشموس ایہا المدفون بارض طوس، السلام علیکم یا سلطان یا ابو الحسن یا علی ابن موثر رضا راضی والقدری والقضاء روحی و جسم لک الفدا ورحمۃ اللہ وبرکاتہ، السلام علیکم مولا یا صاحب الزمان مظہر الایمان شریک القرآن امام الانس والجان، عجل اللہ تعالی فرجک وسہل اللہ تعالی مخرجک ودہورک وجعلنا من انصارک وعوانک ورحمۃ اللہ وبرکاتہ۔
جزاک اللہ۔
O Allah, by the grace of the Ahlul Bayt, we ask that you accept our prayers and act of worship tonight. And we ask you to fulfill everyone's du'as that made this majalis possible and who are a part of it. O Allah, we ask you to forgive us for our bad deeds, and we ask you to continue to guide us to the path of Sirat al-Mustaqim. I would like to request everybody to recite a Surah Fatiha for everyone who is not with us anymore, as well as the sponsor for tonight's Majlis, Brother دلدار and دلاور نقوی، جن کے ان کے جتنی محرومین محرومات ہیں ان کے لیے سب کے لیے ایک سورہ فاتحہ۔ اور اس کے ساتھ ہی ساتھ ہمارے ساجد بھائی کے ماموں اور عادل بھائی کے ماموں جن کا کل انتقال ہوتا ہے ان کے لیے بھی ایک سورہ فاتحہ، محمد حسین۔ And before I ask the kids for nada, just a couple of elans. There are two more programs followed by tonight's Majlis, which will be addressed by Moulana Bilal Rizvi. Tomorrow will be our Shab-e-Gham, and in the Shab-e-Gham we will have various Noor Khans and reciters from out of state, as in Ali Kazmi from Miami, as well as Anjuman-e-Sarkar-e-Wafa from Dallas, as well as a couple brothers from Anjuman-e-Janisar-e-Ahl-e-Bayt in New York. The Majlis will be tomorrow, it's going to start at 9:30, as well as Sunday. There is no Majlis at DAR-E. There will be the Jalus in downtown, which will be at 1:40 p.m. inshallah. All Mu'mineen and Mu'minat are requested to bring together in there with their highest presence. As well as the last Majlis will conclude with the Shab-e-Shahadat of Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salatu wasalam, as well as we will have the Taboot, the Shab-e-Taboot, that Majlis as well.
Dam dam Ali Ali Dam dam Ali Ali Har dam Ali Ali Har dam Ali Ali Nara
Dam dam
Dam dam Yale Adli Dam dam Har dam 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 Har dam Har dam Nara لبيك يا حسين لبيك يا حسين لبيك يا حسين لبيك يا حسين نعرہ حیدری
The Majlis is not over yet till after the kids nare. Please, everybody have to.
نعرہ لبيك يا حسين لبيك يا حسين لبيك يا حسين لبيك يا حسين نعرہ حیدری
لبيك يا حسين لبيك يا حسين لبيك يا حسين لبيك يا حسين
And there's one last elan. There will be a chance of rain on Sunday for the Jalus, so everybody be prepared with a poncho or an umbrella. Nare Haidari!